Think about the last time you got sick, really sick, the kind where you couldn't get out of bed. You probably had medicine in a cabinet somewhere, a phone to call someone if it got worse, a doctor you could see within a day or two, maybe a pharmacy 10 minutes away, with a pill for almost anything you could name. Take all of that away, and what's left is a fever that keeps climbing. No idea what's causing it, and no way of knowing if it passes by tomorrow or ends you by next week. The only people who can help are sitting right beside you, just as lost and just as scared as you are. That was reality for almost the entire span of human existence. So what did they actually do? The first thing to understand is that getting sick in the ancient world was a completely different experience than it is now. Not just because there was no medicine, because there was no understanding of what disease even was. Nobody knew about bacteria. Nobody knew about viruses. Nobody had any concept of germs spreading from one person to another through the air or through water or through a bite from something too small to see. For almost all of human history, illness was a mystery with no visible cause. One day you were fine, the next day you weren't, and there was no story that fully explained why. So the first thing ancient humans had to do was come up with an explanation. Because the human mind does not deal well with unexplained suffering. It needs a reason, even if the reason is wrong. And the explanations they came up with were everywhere. Bad spirits, angry ancestors, a curse from someone in a rival group. These weren't stupid ideas. They were the best available framework for people trying to make sense of an invisible enemy with zero tools to study it. But explanations alone don't save your life. So alongside the spiritual side of things, something else was happening, something far more practical and far older than most people realize. Because here's the thing nobody expects. Ancient humans were not helpless against disease. They had a surprisingly deep, surprisingly effective system of treatment. It just didn't look anything like a hospital. It started with plants. Long before written history, humans were already testing the natural world around them, figuring out which leaves calmed a stomach, which bark brought down a fever, which root helped a wound stop bleeding. This wasn't guesswork done once. It was knowledge built slowly, generation after generation, through trial and a tremendous amount of error. And some of that error was fatal. Someone, at some point, ate the wrong plant and didn't survive long enough to tell anyone what happened. But someone else watched it happen and remembered and passed that memory on. That is how the earliest medicine was built. Not in a lab, in the deaths and near deaths of people who came before you. Archaeologists have found direct evidence of this. In a burial site in Iraq, dating back over 60,000 years, pollen from medicinal plants was discovered surrounding a body, suggesting Neanderthals were deliberately using specific plants for healing purposes, not just as food. In Spain, dental plaque from Neanderthal remains revealed traces of poplar bark, which contains the same active compound found in modern aspirin. They were already using a primitive form of painkiller, tens of thousands of years before anyone had a word for medicine. This wasn't an isolated case either. Across nearly every ancient culture that's ever been studied, you find evidence of plant-based treatment. Willow bark for pain and fever, specific molds and fungi applied to wounds, centuries before anyone understood what penicillin even was. Honey, which has natural antibacterial properties, packed directly onto open injuries to prevent infection. None of these people understood the biology behind why it worked. They just knew, through repetition and observation. And alongside the plants came something even more important: care. When someone got sick in a small group of early humans, they weren't isolated and left alone. They were surrounded, fed even when they couldn't hunt or gather, kept warm, watched through the night. There is archaeological evidence of individuals with severe physical disabilities, people who would have needed constant help just to survive, living for years within their communities, which tells you something important. These groups were not abandoning their sick. They were investing heavily in keeping them alive, long after that person could contribute anything physically back to the group. That single fact changes how you should picture ancient illness. It wasn't a lonely, miserable experience of suffering in a corner of a cave. It was, in its own brutal way, a deeply social event. The whole group's routine would shift around the sick person. Someone would always be near them. Someone would always be trying something, anything, to help. Of course, not everything they tried worked, and when their remedies failed, when the fever didn't break and the wound turned the wrong color, they turned to something deeper than treatment, ritual. This is where things get strange to modern eyes, but they make a strange kind of sense once you understand the world these people were operating in. If illness came from an unseen cause, then maybe it needed an unseen cure. Across cultures, you find evidence of chanting, of specific objects placed near the sick, of figures believed to have special knowledge of the spirit world, called in to intervene when the physical remedies had nothing left to offer. Was any of this medically effective? Not in the way we define effectiveness today, but it almost certainly did something, because we now know that the presence of other people, the feeling of being cared for, the simple reduction of fear and isolation, has a measurable effect on the body's ability to fight illness. The ritual wasn't curing the disease, but it might have been doing something to the person carrying it. There's also something worth mentioning about how illness shaped these groups long term. Surviving an illness, especially as a child, wasn't guaranteed. A huge percentage of early humans never made it to adulthood, and disease was one of the largest reasons why. This meant that the adults who did survive carried something valuable inside them. Immunity, resistance, a body that had already fought certain threats and won. And in a strange way, this shaped human history far beyond any single sickbed. Entire populations developed resistances to local diseases over generations, while remaining catastrophically vulnerable to diseases from somewhere else entirely. This single fact, more than weapons, would later decide the outcome of entire continents colliding for the first time. But that's a story for a different video. For now, what matters is this: the ancient human response to sickness wasn't passive. It wasn't simply waiting to see who survived. It was active, intelligent, and surprisingly sophisticated. We like to think of medicine as something that began in a lab, sometime in the last few hundred years, but it didn't. It began around a fire, with someone pressing a leaf against a wound, watching to see what happened, and remembering the result for the next time it mattered. The tools have changed completely. The instinct underneath them hasn't moved an inch.